That suitcase wasn't worth a dime, not until someone opened it and saw the lighter engraved with the name of a mother who had cried every tear she had. In the summer of 1997, 4 young black men from South Houston, the rising jazz group Fire Syndicate, boarded a private plane bound for Europe to sign a distribution deal. But that plane never landed. No signal, no wreckage, no explanation. For years. Their families called their names. The media dubbed them the Ghost Band. And then, on a June morning in 2023, beneath an old iron bridge in Mississippi, a rusted suitcase surfaced from the mud after a flood. Inside, a stack of handwritten sheet music, a blood-stained scrap of fabric, and a lighter, engraved with the words, "Mama still believes in you." Loretta Wilson is nearly 60 now, living in a modest house on the southeast edge of Houston, a high school teacher and playwright. She once organized church concerts throughout the 80s and 90s. She's not the type to cry easily, but ever since her son disappeared, even the softest jazz on the radio is enough to make her switch it off. Darnell Wilson was her only child, born in 1974 into a working-class family. He grew up surrounded by the rhythm of street music and the power of gospel. Unlike his classmates who gravitated toward rap and hip-hop, Darnell began drumming at 8 and developed a deep love for classical piano. He once told his mother, "Beautiful sound is the only thing that makes me believe in this world," in high school. Darnell gathered a few close friends and formed Fire Syndicate, a jazz band named after the flame from his mother's old lighter. The original lineup included Darnell piano and drums, Miles Thump Jackson bass guitar, Rashad Green trumpet and songwriter, and Leo Martinez drums and rhythm, 4 young black men, each with different personalities, but all sharing the same dream to escape their struggling neighborhood through the one thing they did best: music. Fire Syndicate quickly became beloved by their community. They played at small bars across Texas, schoolyard fundraisers, even weekend fairs hosted by local churches. Their sound was a blend of classic and modern jazz, reminiscent of Miles Davis, but with a younger, more restless beat. In 1996, their track 3 a.m. on Calhoun Street started getting airplay on indie stations in Atlanta and Chicago. A Dutch producer reached out, offering them a European distribution deal. It was the break they'd dreamed of, and it was the last time Loretta ever saw her son. Loretta Wilson no longer lives with expectation. For nearly 3 decades, she hasn't changed her phone number, hasn't moved houses, hasn't altered a single habit, not out of fear of change, but out of fear of being forgotten. In the back bedroom, everything remains as it was. In 1997, Darnell's name stitched into a pillow, the summer blanket he always took on road trips, and a pen case full of old sheet music she's never had the courage to open. Every morning, she still wakes up at 5 Brews Coffee as if her son is still home, still at the piano in the living room, playing through those final summer days. But what haunts her most is not knowing what to hope for, that her son died and finally found peace, or that he's alive but no longer the boy she knew since the disappearance. Loretta Hassan left Texas once. She was once offered a settlement through an airline insurance policy, but refused. "If I take that money," she said, "it's like signing his death certificate." To her neighbors, Loretta is the woman frozen in something unfinished. But there's one thing no one knows every year. On Darnell's birthday, she writes him a letter. No return address, just a line on the envelope to whoever's still trying to find their way back. She drops it into the mailbox on the corner, the same place where Darnell once shared his first date. She believes that if someone's out there, they'll know where to look. In 2019, something strange happened while cleaning out the attic. Loretta found a small USB drive tucked inside the pocket of Darnell's old coat. It contained just one file, labeled Calhoun Demo 2. She never opened it, not because she was afraid, but because, if she did, there'd be nothing left to wait for. Since that day, the USB has sat in the kitchen drawer, next to her recipe book and the old lighter, the one that inspired Darnell's band name. Every time she sees it, she wonders, is it his voice you'll hear or a message from somewhere I can never go back to? Loretta has never told anyone about the USB. It's the one secret she's kept, a frozen moment of time, a silent ember of hope still flickering inside a mother long past her prime. Then, in June 2023, a phone call from the Mississippi State Police shattered the silence. The man's voice trembled slightly. "We found a suitcase, and we believe it may be connected to your son." Loretta stood on her porch, phone clutched tightly in her hand, late sunlight painting her face like an old portrait. She didn't ask for details, didn't break down. Just one question. "That suitcase, what did it smell like?" The officer paused, then replied, "Rust and old music." Something shifted inside Loretta, not relief, not dread, but the feeling of someone who's waited so long. They no longer remember what they're waiting for. A few days later, she boarded her first overnight bus in more than 20 years, bound for Mississippi, in her hand. She carried a worn fabric tote. Inside were some old photographs, the USB labeled Calhoun Demo 2, and the journal shed kept since Darnell was in 10th grade. What troubled her most was this: why Mississippi? It wasn't the flight route. It wasn't on the manifest. There was no reason for a jazz band headed to Europe to end up in the swampy banks of a southern river. But Loretta knew secrets never travel in straight lines. They live in the bends of history, in strange detours only time can uncover. When she arrived, a young officer led her to the site the suitcase had surfaced after a freak flood, wedged between two rusted beams and tangled roots. Loretta didn't cry. She just gently touched the peeling leather and said quietly, "Darnell didn't choose this place, but something brought it back." Inside the suitcase were a few handwritten sheet music pages, a stained denim jacket, a dark cloth scrap, and in a side pocket, the lighter, engraved with familiar words. Loretta picked it up, her hand trembling. She brought it close to her face, as if to smell a memory. For a moment, time collapsed. Everything from 1997, the morning at the airport, the unfinished song on the piano, the words "Mama," "Ill call as soon as I land," all rushed back. But then, something stopped her cold. The lighter was spotless, no dust, no tarnish, and hidden in the lining of the suitcase, they found a small folded note. The ink faded, but the words still visible. "We never left America." On the morning of June 13, 1997, the members of Blue Fire Syndicate arrived at a private airstrip just north of Houston, escorted by a rented van. They carried 2 instrument cases, Darnell's personal backpack, and a small box filled with demo cassette tapes. A photo taken just before takeoff shows all 4 young men beaming, holding up a cardboard sign that read, "Europe, here we come." Behind them stood a silver-gray Gulfstream G3 jet unmarked, without a tail number. The flight was scheduled to depart at 10:40 a.m., with a planned refueling stop in New York before heading on to Amsterdam, but just 30 minutes after takeoff. The aircraft vanished from radar. No emergency calls, no distress signal, just silence. The families only found out from a rushed call by a staffer at the airstrip. The plane never reached the refueling stop and is currently unresponsive. Loretta Wilson was teaching summer school that morning. She remembers the feeling of her heart dropping like it had been pulled straight out of her chest in the days that followed. She and the other families stormed police stations, FBI offices, even independent journalists. But it felt like a maze with no exit. There were no official flight records, no signed distribution deal, and most chilling of all, no wreckage, no debris, no life vests, no personal effects. Darnell's dog, a Labrador named Miles, sat by the front door for 3 days after his departure. He refused to eat, refused to sleep. He growled when anyone came near. "I think he knew," Loretta said. "He knew Darnell wasn't coming back." The media swarmed in. Headlines blared, "Young jazz band, vanishes, en route to Europe, phantom flight with no records, cover-up in the skies." But the attention faded within 2 weeks, overtaken by a breaking political scandal. No matter how hard they pushed, the families kept hearing the same thing: "We can't confirm the plane existed." Then came the strangest detail of all: a suitcase Loretta found months later in her attic. It was labeled with Darnell's name, but she knew it wasn't the one he took. That one had been a reddish-brown Samsonite. This was plain black and empty, except for a single scrap of paper with a scribbled message. Not every flight goes to the sky. The early investigation went nowhere. No airline claimed the Gulfstream. No radar logs showed its path. No pilot registration could be located. Some investigators speculated it may have been a last-minute private charter, arranged through unregulated intermediaries. The focus then shifted to the music industry, but when the families contacted the record label that had allegedly reached out, no one remembered the name Theo van Beek, the Dutch producer the group had spoken to. There were no emails, no signed contracts, just a trail of faxes that had been discarded days after arrival. The families hired private investigators, tracing the demo tapes across old studios in New Orleans, Chicago, even Toronto, hoping one had been quietly released. But every lead dried up. The only thing that remained was a taped interview from a 1996 local radio show, where Darnell had said, "We don't play to be famous. We play to survive." In August 1997, the FBI officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to establish a criminal act. The families were outraged. Rosa Martinez, Leo's mother, stood on the steps of a federal building holding a photo of her son, a sign beneath it reading, "If they were a white band, would they still be missing?" Her words struck a nerve, spreading through online communities and getting reshared by Black artists for years to come. But like so many unsolved disappearances, the case faded 10 years later. In 2007, an amateur mystery blogger published a piece titled "The Jazz Band That Vanished and the Ticket Never Scanned." The author claimed to have discovered an unscanned e-ticket for a D. Wilson issued at New Orleans International Airport 3 days after the band was presumed missing. The ticket had never been used. It existed in the system as a ghost file, with no explanation. Loretta heard about it, but said nothing instead. She quietly traveled to New Orleans on the anniversary of that tickets issue, standing at the gate, watching boarding scanners she didn't fully understand, and then returned home once again with nothing. When Loretta got the call from the Wilkinson County Sheriff's Office, her first reaction wasn't shock. It was a strange calm. They told her a suitcase had been found wedged under a bridge near a dried riverbed outside Natchez, Mississippi. At first, responders thought it was just debris, but inside the case, beneath a layer of dark red lining, was a water-damaged note signed Darnell Wilson. The news spread quickly. Loretta said nothing to the press. She simply packed her old cloth tote, the one she hadn't touched since the day Darnell left. Inside were a photo of Blue Fire around the piano, his high school journal, and the USB labeled Calhoun Demo 2 when she arrived. She was brought into a small room at the sheriff's office, where the suitcase sat on a table, still damp with river mud and rust. Inside, along with the now-known contents, Loretta noticed something no one else had mentioned: a half-finished sheet of handwritten music. The lyrics stopped after a single line, in silence. "The rhythm still plays." Loretta froze. That line had once been written on Darnell's bedroom wall after his best friend was killed in a street shooting. No one else would have known it. It wasn't just a lyric. It was a promise that, even if forgotten, music would remain as witness. Police also recovered a blood-stained denim scrap. Preliminary DNA confirmed the blood was Darnell's. But what left Loretta speechless was the lighter. Not because it had survived, but because it was clean, pristine. No corrosion, no mud, as if someone had wiped it down just days ago. Authorities were baffled. They speculated someone might be planted it returning to the suitcase recently to leave a message. Loretta held the lighter. Reading the engraving, "Mama still believes in you. No tears fell, only a whisper. So you still hear me." Then investigators showed her a quick photo they'd taken of a slip of paper found buried in the suitcase lining, in shaky handwriting. It read, "We never left America." If they never left the country, where did they go? Who kept them hidden for 26 years? And why did the suitcase surface now? Just when Loretta had finally let go of hope, news of the suitcase barely made a few short lines in the local press. But one particular detail in the police report sent ripples through the community of independent investigators: a small, crumpled map hidden in the suitcase lining, marking a region in southern Louisiana. No captions. Just 3 red ink dots and a dashed line crossing through the swampland. When a podcast team specializing in cybercrime heard about this, they immediately reopened the 1997 file and uncovered a detail never made public: an internal FBI note referencing a report from a civilian radar station. That radar had detected a low-altitude anomaly moving southwest, not toward New York, but heading in the opposite direction, toward the Louisiana-Mississippi border. The signal vanished just 6 minutes later. No one knows why that report was dismissed. During a later internal review, a former air traffic controller revealed the radar station had suffered a technical failure, its recording software malfunctioned, and the data was never saved. A glitch. Or did someone intentionally erase the trail when Loretta heard this? She said nothing. She simply pulled a small folded paper from her wallet, a photocopy of the very map, mailed to her anonymously after the suitcase surfaced. The handwriting on the envelope. She recognized it instantly. It belonged to Rashad the trumpeter, the one who always carried a brown leather notebook with him, notably. According to Loretta, Rashad was the only member of the group who had ever spent time in Louisiana. His father once worked at a now-abandoned shipyard in Baton Rouge, and now, putting the clues together, the map, the radar signal, the location where the suitcase was found, they all pointed to a triangle, a dead zone, a place no one wanted to touch, 1 month after the map was made public. A stranger showed up at the Blue Fire Syndicate memorial held in 3rd Ward Park. He gave no name, just left behind a handwritten copy of the sheet music found in the suitcase, along with a note. "You don't remember me, but I was the sound technician that night at the Houston airport." Loretta recognized the handwriting right away, almost identical to the notes Darnell used to leave around the house, a soft slant. The tail on the letter G, slightly long. The man left no contact info, but in his note, he recalled overhearing an intense argument between Rashad and a white man in a suit, someone none of the group really knew. What haunted him was the final thing, said before the plane door closed. "We've signed. You have no rights now." He believed the plane never left Houston. It may have circled back, landing somewhere near Louisiana. Another striking clue, the track found in the suitcase. Calhoun's sketch, 3rd version, when sent to a music theory expert, was revealed to be deliberately scrambled. Not a draft, but a code. This was written to hide something, the analyst said, and whoever wrote it knew exactly how to bury meaning inside music. Loretta asked a student at the university where she once taught to decode it. They found a repeating pattern, GAFD, in alphabetical cipher. That spells GAFD, possibly Georgia, Alabama, Florida, but it led nowhere, until Loretta remembered Calhoun wasn't just a street. It was the name of a ghost town near the Louisiana border in a 1998 interview. Leo Martinez's father mentioned that Rashad always carried a brown notebook. It held compositions and secrets he couldn't say aloud, weeks after the group vanished. Mr. Martinez received an anonymous package, Leo's necklace, a group photo from 1996, and a scrap of paper with the words, "He wrote too much." That notebook has never been found. In 2023, as media reignited interest in the suitcase, a retired airport staffer named Margie Rollins contacted the podcast team. She said she'd worked radar back in 1997, the day the group left. She reviewed the maintenance logs and discovered camera 4, aimed at the private runway, had cut out for exactly 36 minutes. The same window the plane supposedly took off. When she asked to investigate further, her supervisor told her there's nothing suspicious. Let it go. The incident disturbed her so deeply that she resigned just months later. Loretta heard about this on a rebroadcast. She was staying with family in Dallas at the time. She paused, closed her eyes as if she'd known all along. She whispered, "Someone saw everything, but the camera didn't." And perhaps the strangest detail, the final backup of footage from camera 4, was deleted from the server just 3 days after the group vanished. No reason, no trace. When independent investigators filed a FOIA request, the response came back. This file never existed. The story ends with the chilling feeling of a memory erased not by time, but because someone decided it should be erased. 1 week after the disclosure about camera 4, Loretta received a curious package, no sender, no postal mark. Inside the box lay a red cassette tape, its label faintly reading Calhoun Studio 2. The strange thing was, this tape didn't match any recording Loretta had ever heard from the Blue Fire Syndicate. She took the cassette to an old recording studio in Dallas, where the owner still had vintage tape decks, when the music began. The room fell silent. It wasn't a song, It was a conversation. Darnell's voice, firm and anxious. "No, I'm not signing this. I don't know who they are." Then Rashad, whispering, "Just be quiet. This will all go away soon." And then a strange man's voice, "Cold, you've belonged to us since you agreed to that flight." The tape ended with sounds of struggle, chaotic noise, and a loud crash like a heavy door slamming shut. Loretta had to sit down. She didn't cry, she just clenched her hands tightly, as if praying yet also holding herself together. She handed the tape to local police, but they said there wasn't enough forensic data to verify no timestamps, no confirmed identities, however. An audio engineer in retirement, Charles DeWitt, who once worked with amateur recordings, listened and identified a distinctive background, sound metal wind chimes. He was certain he had heard that same audio during a 1998 session at a warehouse in Louisiana near Calhoun. This detail ignited a new theory. Blue Fire Syndicate never left U.S. soil. They may have been held not by terrorists, but by a hidden force within the music industry, a power deep enough to erase flight records, disable radar, force artists into exploitative contracts. Loretta thought. They weren't killed, their identity was stolen. The next day, the tape discovery was followed by an anonymous email to the podcast investigation team. Attached was a PDF, a music rights contract dated June 12, 1997, one day before departure, and in the signing block, not a band member's name appeared. But Jeremiah Knox was a producer known in underground music circles, accused of exploiting young artists via unfair contracts, but never prosecuted. The document lists him as creative director at Rattlesnake Sound, a label with no official office, yet linked to leaked, unofficial releases. Investigative journalists traced Knox, but found that after 2001, he vanished entirely, no address, no bank activity, no tax records. An old 2004 Baton Rouge news article noted Knox's brief arrest for assault. Though the charges were dropped when the witness recanted, one musician later said Knox enjoyed holding voices that hadn't been heard yet. That phrase, in the context of Loretta's discoveries, was chilling. Loretta printed the contract and placed it beside the red cassette. She whispered, "How did a man like this end up in my son's?" Records officials offered no official comment, but an anonymous low-level detective admitted they had heard Knox's name, but were told not to dig deeper. That felt like not just indifference, but systemic protection of the forces behind the disappearance. Then, one afternoon in July, Loretta received a call from a young intern named Nevia, working at Houston's Community Music Archive. Nevia said she'd found a box labeled Youth Jazz Workshop 1996 buried in the basement. Inside was a brown leather notebook engraved simply Rashad. Loretta froze. The notebook was intact water stains, smudged ink, but mostly legible. The final page changed everything. In shaky handwriting it read, "If I can't get out. Forgive me. I only want them to live." Those words struck like a blade, but she read on. Earlier pages detailed shadowy meetings between Rashad and someone referred to only as J.K., now identified as Jeremiah Knox. Rashad believed Knox would get them to Europe, but he came to realize Knox only wanted control. He wrote, "Knox told me, if I don't sign, the group will never leave this country, but if I do, maybe we still have a chance." In his final lines, Rashad didn't paint himself as a victim, but as a sacrifice. "I have no family to lose." He confessed, but they do. Darnell has a mother. Leo has a sister. Trey isn't even graduated yet. If I have to choose, I choose myself. Loretta closed the notebook, her hands trembling. She had once doubted Rashad. Now, her doubt weighed heavy with regret. Rashad might have led them to the edge, but he could also have been the only one trying to save them. And if he signed to keep them alive, why did they still vanish? Who possessed more power than Jeremiah Knox? All the clues now seemed to point toward Rashad, the one friend in the group everyone once trusted most. But the truth Loretta never expected came from an outsider, Reggie Miles, the old gatekeeper of Calhoun's studio, now homeless and living off church assistance. Reggie once worked as a temp security guard at the rundown warehouse where Blue Fire rehearsed just days before their ill-fated flight, in a podcast interview. Reggie recounted, "One night, I saw Rashad standing out in the lot, holding his head like he'd just heard something awful. A black SUV pulled up. 3 men in black got out. I thought they were producers, but after that, Rashad never came back." Reggie's story had been dismissed for over 2 decades, but after the notebook surfaced, people started revisiting what they'd once ignored. Then came the second twist. An anonymous YouTube account uploaded a grainy video of a live jam session at a tiny jazz club in Cuba posted in 2005. The trumpet player, his back to the camera, bore an uncanny resemblance to Rashad. The tune, a reworked version of Calhoun. Even Loretta couldn't be certain. But she said, "My heart stopped. I know how it sounds. That's my child's voice." The internet split into 2 camps. Some believed Rashad escaped whatever held them captive, but couldn't save the others. Others accused him of betrayal, signing the deal and vanishing. Trust fractured. But for Loretta, the scariest part wasn't betrayal. It was not knowing what to believe anymore, in the shadows of this disappearance. No one was entirely innocent. No one fully understood what had happened. And maybe no one even wanted the full truth, because it could shatter everything they believed in justice. Music, humanity. 9 months after the suitcase emerged from the mud, the podcast team received a letter postmarked from the Colorado Highlands. The sender signed as MC and wrote just 1 page, in 2 short paragraphs. The first read, "I was the one who recorded the final Calhoun session. The second, I never met the group, but I was hired to erase every trace of them." The podcast host described reading the letter as falling into an invisible abyss. The world wasn't always made of clear heroes and villains. Sometimes it was just gears turning, people doing jobs without knowing the full picture. But those very people, by keeping silent for decades, had left holes in the hearts of families that could never be filled. Loretta didn't cry when she heard about the letter. She simply stood still before an old photo of the band, 4 young men, laughing in the Houston sun, not yet knowing the world would turn its back on them. She no longer hoped to find her son. But she believed one thing with all her heart. They existed. They gave everything they had, and silence cannot be the final note in a local community radio broadcast. Loretta said something that left the audience speechless. If someone out there still remembers them, just remembers, that's enough to fight the forgetting. Right now. That video of the band is still online. Calhoun is still being played at student concerts, and the lighter, the silent witness, sits quietly on Loretta's desk. A reminder that sometimes, a mother is the last investigator left. The one who never gives up. 1 year after the lighter made its way back to Loretta, she organized a memorial concert at a small church near Houston's 3rd Ward. Not a single seat in the hall was empty. Everyone who had known, heard of, or only recently discovered Blue Fire was there. On stage, a group of high school students played Calhoun note by note, bar by bar, the music rising gently, as if echoing from some distant place. After the performance, Loretta stepped up to the microphone. She didn't ask for donations. She didn't call for justice. She simply spoke of nights spent in silence. Her hand resting on Rashad's notebook, ears straining to hear the old tape, heart still hoping for the impossible. Her voice was soft. "I don't know if anyone's still alive, but I do know this: some sounds, once made, never disappear." The story of Blue Fire became a quiet symbol in the community, not because the mystery had been solved, but because faith had endured. The podcasts kept digging. Students began studying their disappearance as part of a forgotten cultural history, and in a small cafe in Baton Rouge, a photo of 4 young men now hangs on the wall, no names. Just a simple line: "Remember the ones who played until the end." Loretta no longer speaks much to the press, but in her small room, the suitcase now rests carefully inside a glass cabinet, beside the final handwritten copy of Calhoun. She believes that someday, someone will hear that melody and understand the truth was never buried. It just needed someone quiet enough to listen.